and you're devastated that he is claiming you're not his. Ms. Lyde's mother was unfaithful during your 7-year relationship.
I didn't really have a relationship with Mr. Ellis growing up. Homes, foster homes, no male role model in my life.
I feel for her and all, but I'm not her father. I mean, her mother, she disappears weeks at a time out there partying.
It was white with black hair and blue eyes. And I'm not white. I don't have...
You know that babies come in all shapes, sizes, and shades of color, especially African-American children. And so you're saying you were in a relationship with her mother?
Yes, I was.
And it was a sexual relationship?
Yes, it was. I quit blaming it on me.
My mom has never, ever lied to me, even when things got bad, when they got worse. My mom has never lied to me. So wouldn't you want to keep some kind of information or record so if I did grow up and I had questions,
no, I would not.
Hey,
I would not want to keep that kind of information.
This case gathers in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom not as entertainment, but as a living lesson in the relationship between law and justice, a space where emotional memory collapses under the weight of scientific certainty. The DNA test is not presented as a casual swab, but as the instrument that has rewritten identities, revoked denials, corrected narratives, and proven that in paternity matters, adverse inference in Evidence Act standards don't bend for nostalgia, assumptions, color comparison, or pride. The courtroom atmosphere is controlled and dignified. Judge Lauren Lake stands not just as a presiding officer, but as an interpreter of human failure, balancing parental absences, lifelong unanswered questions, financial hardship, and buried resentment. Guests arrive with decades of emotional debris, estranged fathers, adult children raised without a male role model, mothers whose memories conflict with documented records, and grandparents who built rejection based solely on physical traits. This hearing demonstrates how jurisprudence's concept of justice often collides with personal truth. Honesty is not warm here. It is procedural, documented, time-stamped, and executed. The participants do not enter as calm observers. They bring accumulated betrayal. One side insists a DNA test already proved him 99.9% not the father. The opposing side swears the result was 99% yes. That documented contradiction is why Judge Lauren Lake orders clarity. Because in this courtroom, memory cannot outrank science, and assumptions cannot be admitted without structured proof. Even familial certainty, skin tone arguments, and generational gossip are cross-examined under statutory expectations. Adverse inference in evidence becomes relevant when one party claims records existed, but were conveniently never retained, never filed, or lost. The emotional weight is not mere storytelling. It is legal consequence. A father denies identity not because he didn't love the child's mother, but because he trusted a sheet of paper years ago. That paperwork, however, now stands in conflict with DNA diagnostics confirmed in court. Multiple decades of no child support, no father-daughter dances, no presence at milestones, no guidance, and emotional void all trace back to a single documented result that is now legally overturned. Judge Lauren Lake interprets this not as drama, but as a demonstration of how truth changes everything when placed on the record. This moment directly aligns with discussions in the Game Changing Attorney podcast about evidence-based litigation and accountability, and the Divorce Course podcast discussions on identity responsibility, when parental obligations are avoided based on prior misunderstanding or procedural loopholes. In Celebrate Recovery testimonies, people admit that past wounds shape future relational patterns. Here, the adult daughter's confession that absence shaped her self-worth stands as legal evidence of harm, not just emotional but generational. Her experience reflects adoption stories, full episodes where children raised without confirmed lineage seek not money but identity, name, belonging, origin. The shadow of unconfirmed fatherhood restricts development and triggers the statistics that child support Supreme Court cases analyze. When identity is denied, the psychological structure fractures. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, emotional expression does not replace record examination. Every party is heard because evidence must be contextualized. The mother insists she always told her child the truth. The father insists the original government agency freed him from all child support obligations because the report stated he was not the parent. His relief became her lifelong abandonment. Years of evidence stage in divorce-like confrontation now reach a definitive legal end. The judge does not chastise, she untangles. She confirms why DNA test cheating stories exist. Because emotional timelines rarely align with biological fact. She explains why people regret taking DNA tests. Not because science failed, but because truth arrived too late, after identity damage was done. The daughter explains her adolescence with an absence of guidance, cycling through unstable placement, foster environments, and self-taught survival. That absence is not reviewed as melodrama, but as a measurable consequence of denied paternity. Judge Lauren Lake places that emotional testimony within the structure of jurisprudence. If truth was withheld, then denial is not just ignorance but harm. The judge allows the legal expert to reinforce what state procedure dictates. If a test had confirmed paternity, child support enforcement would have been automatic. That explanation eliminates speculation. It clarifies that government databases, clerical error, administrative misfiling, and delayed garnishment can create decades of misinformation. This reflects discussions in legal podcasts analyzing how procedural error becomes narrative reality. When the envelope is opened and DNA certainty is revealed, it is not victory, it is correction. The decades of confusion, emotional distance, and generational accusation collapse into legal truth. Judge Lauren Lake issues the result without theatrics. Legitimacy is restored not for applause but for closure. For the grandmother's denial, evidence is more authoritative than perception. For the father's escape from obligation, science removes doubt. For the daughter's emotional isolation, identity is finally authenticated. This courtroom therefore becomes the intersection point for all listed themes. DNA test as reform. People regret taking truth too late. Truth changes everything podcast ideology, reflected in real consequence. Relationship between law and justice, established when personal narrative versus scientific record is reconciled. Adverse inference applied to missing or contradictory paperwork. Child support, Supreme Court logic referenced in background. The game-changing attorney podcast logic on responsibility. The divorce course podcast analysis of emotional cost. Celebrate recovery testimonies, mirror of identity restoration. Adoption stories full episodes parallel of lineage pursuit. DNA test cheating stories relevancy through conflicting past tests. The final moment of acknowledgement from the father is not casual. It is legal and moral recognition. Judge Lauren Lake reminds parties that identity cannot be delayed without consequence. Closure is not celebration. It is documented truth finally overtaking decades of misunderstanding. Judge Lauren Lake transitions the courtroom from shock to correction, guiding each participant through what legal truth means after a lifetime of emotional contradiction. The moment a DNA test reverses decades of family belief, the courtroom demonstrates why truth changes everything, not just as a statement, but as a living restructuring of identity, obligation, memory, and regret. This is not an emotional performance. It is a justice recalibration. The father, previously confident in the historical DNA paperwork that released him from child support, now faces scientific proof that he is indeed the biological parent. That discrepancy is no longer a matter of opinion. It is a documented example of system-induced misdirection, relevant to discussions on adverse inference in Evidence Act principles when crucial documentation cannot be produced, cannot be validated, or contradicts current forensic truth. The original dismissal he relied on was not malicious denial, but institutional error, administrative confusion, or misinterpretation that severed an entire child's identity formation. Judge Lauren Lake recognizes that parental absence rooted in incorrect state record conclusions still produces real developmental loss. The adult daughter's testimony illustrates psychological impact, paralleling Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals recount how absence, misidentification, and emotional neglect shape relational patterns, self-worth, and the ability to trust. Her truth is not used to shame, but to articulate harm recognized under jurisprudence's concept of justice. Justice is not merely naming the father. It is acknowledging what absence cost the child, not financially alone, but structurally, emotionally, socially, and psychologically. This exact collision of facts echoes discussions in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal representation must balance statute interpretation with human consequence. The father maintained distance because a government-based DNA document told him he was free. The daughter lived decades without paternal confirmation because family testimony insisted he was the only possible father. Judge Lauren Lake clarifies that law and memory are not interchangeable. Memory provides motive but not evidence. Evidence provides truth but not automatic healing. Once DNA test results correct the record, the courtroom shifts focus from denial to restoration. The mother's unwavering claim, dismissed for decades as emotional insistence, now stands validated under pure genetics. The daughter's belief, shaped by maternal certainty and personal resemblance, also stands legally affirmed. The grandmother's rejection, long rooted in physical assumption, collapses instantly under molecular proof. Even her insistence on hereditary recognition falls under judicial neutrality. Biology does not require visual approval. Judge Lauren Lake notes this progression not as family drama, but as legal tension. Relationship between law and justice demands that even when truth arrives late, it must still arrive documented. The father expresses apology, acknowledging that reliance on paperwork, even if government issued, cannot erase what was lost. His regret parallels people regret taking DNA tests not because truth is wrong, but because truth delivered late rewrites every prior decision. It exposes absence not as avoidance, but as misled certainty. The daughter's life story fits the arc discussed in the Divorce Course podcast. When parental identity remains unresolved, children develop independence through survival, not guidance. She navigated foster homes, emotional abandonment, lack of social belonging, and self-validation, forming adulthood without paternal affirmation. This aligns with adoption stories' full episodes, where identity is not framed as luxury but necessity. Connection to lineage, medical history, emotional grounding, and cultural origin. Judge Lauren Lake offers clarity with judicial restraint. The ruling does not scold the father for past absence, but acknowledges systemic misinterpretation. His belief was formed not from avoidance, but from bureaucratic confirmation. His child support release was granted legally, making his emotional detachment understandable within legal context, but personally devastating for the child. The judge states, without raising voice, that the system must own its flaws just as families must own their truths. The father's apology is not symbolic. It is correction, documented on the record, equivalent to sealing an identity chapter under law. His pledge to reconnect does not erase years but prevents future repetition. Judge Lauren Lake frames this as restoration logic. Truth changes everything not merely in outcome but in direction. Now, relationships can begin under clarity rather than narrative conflict. Where DNA test cheating stories imply infidelity-driven doubt, this case demonstrates that doubt may originate from institutional record conflict, not human deceit. Both results from the past cannot coexist. Once science resolves contradiction, denial dissolves without debate. The judge ensures that emotional testimony is not invalidated but contextualized. The daughter's pain is legally recognized as consequence. The parent's confusion is recognized as misinformed reliance, and the grandmother's disbelief is recognized as assumption-based misinterpretation. Judge Lauren Lake exemplifies concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not punishment but restoration, returning identity to its rightful owner. The daughter now has legal fatherhood, a documented lineage, and a corrected personal history. The father, freed for decades based on one DNA test, is now bound by the corrected one. Both truths existed. Only one was accurate. This case becomes educational material worthy of truth changes everything podcast breakdowns. How science, identity, law, and emotional confession intersect under judicial structure. Legal experts often debate misfiled paternity conclusions, mismatched case numbers, clerical DNA recording mistakes, and interstate record transfers. This case mirrors those discussions. The decades-long identity detour becomes a study scenario for Supreme Court child support reevaluation protocols. If state documentation misidentified paternity results, reparative acknowledgement must follow without retroactive financial penalty, but with present emotional accountability. The daughter's statement that she lacked a male role model is not theatrical. It provides measurable psychological context. When paternal absence is based on incorrect information, the child assumes rejection. The father assumed release. Judge Lauren Lake bridges this with legal neutrality, presenting that absence is not always intentional neglect, but may stem from systems leaving families with impossibly conflicting truths. This moment in the courtroom completes the transformation of narrative to documented certainty. Truth changes, everything becomes real as all parties adjust their internal histories. The daughter no longer interprets abandonment as deliberate. The father no longer interprets separation as justified. The grandmother no longer interprets lineage visually. The mother no longer defends alone. The courtroom no longer wonders but concludes. Thus, this second segment establishes that law and justice finally align, creating an identity framework that can sustain healing, reconciliation, and adult understanding without blame-driven hostility. With identity now legally corrected, Judge Lauren Lake shifts the courtroom from revelation to consequence. The ruling is not limited to confirmed paternity. It embodies the lifelong weight of being unseen, unheard, and misidentified. When a DNA test reverses generational belief, every relationship must adjust posture, language, and memory. Truth changes everything not because it destroys, but because it reorders what people believed was fixed. The daughter's internal timeline must now be rewritten. For years, her emotional narrative was built on absence interpreted as dismissal. Her self-worth shaped itself around loss, inconsistency, longing, and invisibility. That pattern is mirrored in recovery frameworks discussed in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where emotional abandonment becomes a blueprint for relational distrust. Now, with scientific confirmation, abandonment is no longer personal rejection. It is bureaucratic misdirection compounded by family assumption. Her identity, previously floating without anchor, now stands with documented origin. Judge Lauren Lake makes clear that courtroom truth has two layers: law and justice. Law confirms biological connection. Justice acknowledges what it cost. That duality aligns with discussions on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where attorneys weigh procedural correctness against emotional result, and with analysis in the Divorce Course podcast, where delayed truth becomes evidence of systemic imperfection. The father relied on an official result he believed accurate. The daughter relied on maternal certainty she believed undeniable. Both stood on separate versions of truth until science settled the divide. The father's apology represents more than remorse. It functions as legal closure. He is no longer defending himself with outdated paperwork or fear of obligation. Instead, he stands aligned with corrected record, stepping into responsibility not out of enforcement but realization. This aligns with the relationship between law and justice. Law identifies, but justice asks for restoration. That restoration is not forced reconciliation. It is acknowledgement of loss, absence, and identity damage that cannot be undone. The grandmother's disbelief, once anchored in visual projection and genetic expectation, can no longer serve as justification. Her certainty, shaped not by evidence but by comparison and assumption, collapses under molecular precision. Judge Lauren Lake does not condemn her skepticism, but places it within the context of how families historically interpreted lineage. Generations linked identity to physical resemblance, ignoring biological variation. DNA test technology corrected what generational judgment could not. That lesson reflects episodes within adoption stories, full episodes, where children learn that belonging extends beyond visual similarity. This ruling closes the chapter not with triumph but with recalibration. The father's long-held belief that he was absolved of responsibility was not malicious. It was procedural. He believed the state when it told him he was not the father. That belief shaped years of distance. Now, science reveals that distance was built on institutional error. Judge Lauren Lake situates this within adverse inference in evidence reasoning. When past documents conflict with present verified science, the court must accept corrected truth and acknowledge that earlier absence was constructed by misinformation, not intentional neglect. The daughter acknowledges through the court structure that her self-taught resilience, developed through foster movement, lack of paternal identity, and emotional isolation, is valid but no longer needs to operate from deficit. Her adulthood has been shaped by survival, yet she now receives legal affirmation. That shift mirrors teachings in Truth Changes Everything podcast, where individuals learn that factual identity correction allows emotional release, not erasure. The courtroom, under Judge Lauren Lake, transitions from confrontation to structured restoration. This case becomes a living example for future legal study on how DNA test contradictions affect child support, identity establishment, and memory formation. It stands as precedent for why biological truth cannot remain buried under administrative error. The daughter's emotional record now aligns with her biological one for the first time. Furthermore, this outcome reflects patterns seen in DNA test cheating stories. Though this case proves doubt can originate not from infidelity, but from record confusion and system inconsistency. Here, mistrust was not relational betrayal but procedural breakdown. The father did not reject based on personal avoidance, but on institutional communication. Judge Lauren Lake clarifies that while this does not erase emotional loss, it influences how resentment transitions to understanding. The final transformation is legal and personal. The daughter now stands with confirmed lineage. The father now stands with corrected responsibility. The mother now stands validated without further defense. The grandmother now stands in revision of prior denial. The court now stands as the agent that reconciled decades of contradiction. Judge Lauren Lake does not seal the outcome with sentimentality. She seals it with legal finality, which becomes the emotional release. The daughter's identity, echoed in the Divorce Course podcast conversations, is no longer speculative. The father's narrative, previously shaped by clerical error, now operates under truth. This shift does not demand immediate emotional reconnection. It only requires recognition and lawful acceptance. The ruling does not require financial retroactivity or punishment. Instead, it demands acknowledgement. Justice here is not transactional but restorative. The father's willingness to rebuild presence, even belatedly, reflects jurisprudence's deeper aim, not to undo time but to prevent continued misalignment. Truth arrived late, but it arrived with full authority. That timing shapes the daughter's next chapter, not defined by longing for identity, but equipped with verified origin. The courtroom closes not in celebration but in documented peace. Everyone departs with corrected history. Truth changes everything because it rearranges identity, obligation, and memory under undeniable evidence. Judge Lauren Lake ensures that this family no longer lives in fractured narrative. The daughter, for the first time, stands not as disputed, but as confirmed. That confirmation is the true closure of this case. Law finally aligned with life.